Hello, my name is Caleb Denby, and welcome back to Game Review. Today, I wanted to take a look at a rapid game, and not from the tournament you might be expecting. Of course, at the end of 2019, we had the World Rapid and Blitz Championships. But a lot of people might not know that the first Rapid Championship was actually played all the way back in 1988. And it was kind of unique in the fact that they did one of them, and then there were some controversies surrounding it, so they actually didn't do another one until the 2000s. And that's the format that we now have today. There were a couple in between, but eventually we did arrive at the World Rapid Championships as we now know them. However, in this 1988 World Rapid Championship, Anatoly Karpov was the favorite, and Garry Kasparov actually declined to play, which is why they didn't do another one for quite a while. With that in mind, Anatoly Karpov did win the entire event, and of course, that made him, I guess, the first World Rapid Championship, the first World Rapid Champion. Although at the time, I think they called it the Active Chess Champion, which was slightly strange. Anyways, though, today I wanted to take a look at one of his games from that tournament where he played Dzindzichashvili. So in this one, Anatoly had the black pieces, and let's see how he handled it. He chose the Caro-Kann, one of my favorite openings. We see d4, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, bishop d3, knight c6, c3, and knight f6. And this is the exchange Caro-Kann. It's one of the most common ways for white to play. And very often, you'll see white play this move h3 here. And the idea of this move is it's going to be slightly uncomfortable for black to develop this bishop. This is one of the main lines these days, and I think this is one of the ways that white really pushes for an edge in modern chess. With that in mind, though, the prescribed way of playing against h3 back in the 1980s, I think, was to play a move like queen c7 or a move like e5, breaking in the center, taking advantage of these dark squares. So the white players at the time thought, well, why would I allow all that? I can simply play bishop f4, stop all of these moves, and force black to do something else. Of course, the downside to this is that you give black the g4 square. So you see kind of the give and take already. In the game, Dzindzichashvili chose to play bishop f4, so Karpov developed his bishop. The queen is attacked, so it comes out to b3, hitting a b7 pawn. Simply queen c8 defends the threat. This knight comes out to d2. We now see e6, knight gf3, bishop b7, castles, and castles, both sides simply getting developed. And now, rook a e1 was white's choice. This bishop actually comes back to h5, and this move might look a little bit strange at first, but the idea is very simple. The idea is that this bishop, in structures like this, even with a pawn on e3 sometimes, the light squared bishop is almost always white's most powerful minor piece. So you'll see black quite often do anything he can to trade this bishop off the board. And that's exactly what's going on here with bishop h5. Karpov is aiming to play bishop g6 to contest this bishop and force it to trade itself off. White tries to prevent this by playing knight e5, keeping an eye on the g6 square, but Karpov is not so easily swayed. He trades this knight and continues with bishop g6 anyways. White takes this opportunity not to try to save the bishop, because if the bishop can't be on d3, it's really not quite as powerful as white would like it to be. So instead, we see the trade, doubling black's pawns. And now this queen actually retreats all the way back to d1. And now we kind of fully understand the character of the position. Both sides have made some trades, made some decisions already, and it's very clear what both sides want to do. Of course, we have a Carlsbad-like structure on the queen's side here, meaning white has these four pawns all lined up, seemingly very solid, and in the meanwhile, black has a d pawn and an a and a b pawn, but no c pawn. So what this means is it's the prime opportunity for black to launch what's called a minority attack. The minority attack, of course, is when you attack a pawn majority with a pawn minority. So black is going to use these two pawns to try and create some weaknesses on the queen's side. You can expect a move like b4, aiming for b takes c3, and if this b pawn would recapture, the c pawn is now very weak on a half-open file. So what does this leave for white? Well, you can simply look at the placement of his pieces, and the idea becomes pretty obvious. This queen just retreated back to d1, aiming at the king side. This rook aims at the center, and more specifically the king side of the center. This rook, already placed on the f-file, aims at the center. This bishop aims at the king. This knight, ready to come in to attack the king. White's going to play on the king's side. And so, Black wastes no time, launches his minority attack with b5. White starts with the move rook e3. Black continues with a5. And now, White plays h4. And so both sides are fully committed to these plans, as they should be. Black continues with b4. White continues with g4. And now, it's a very interesting decision that Karpov has to make here. There's a couple different ways you can treat this tension on the queen's side. One way you can handle it is to take on c3. And this would be a perfectly valid way to play. Rook takes c3 would likely be the response. And now, rather than a weakness on c3, White has a weakness on b2 to contend with. You can imagine a move like queen a6 and something like king g2. And this is going to be the weak point in the White camp that Black is going to aim for. However, if you notice though, this bishop is placed on a very nice diagonal, which for the moment prevents any Black rooks from coming straight to b8. So perhaps this is one reason why Karpov chose another way to deal with this tension, and that is playing a4. Karpov wants to attack the pawn chain at its base. He wants to play a3, get rid of this annoying b2 pawn, and then break through on the c-file and the a-file, which I like this idea quite a bit. It does give White the opportunity to capture on b4, also gaining this pawn structure, but it would activate the Black bishop ever so slightly. Instead, we see h5. White just continues his attack on the king's side. And now Karpov continues with a3, just simply going right for the throat, attacking the space of the pawn chain as soon as possible. And this is a very interesting dynamic that you see when both sides have plans on opposite sides of the board, that they kind of ignore each other. The reason for that is sometimes when you touch your pawns or touch your pieces on the side of the board where your opponent's attacking you, it only serves to make more weaknesses or to quicken their play. So both sides are ignoring each other, trying to get their plan to break through first. And here we see White actually go for c takes b4, when in fact a move like h takes g6 might have also been another way to play, just continuing to ignore the threats. But we see a takes b4, and here Karpov actually makes a pretty significant mistake. The best move by far is to take on b2, opening up this a-file and allowing the Black pieces to really be active. Perhaps he was worried about a move like a3, defending this b4 pawn, when it's a little bit unclear if Black's going to be in time to hold on to this pawn and break through on the queen's side. If there's simply a move like knight d7, you're going to want to move this bishop out of the way. And after we clear up some tension over here, and bishop f6, it's a little unclear how White is going to pick up this pawn when our bishop's very, very quickly coming into the game. Of course, there are other ways to play as well. For example, if White chooses to leave this bishop here and takes on g6, we can capture. And after takes, and takes, let's say queen b3, trying to pick up this pawn, we always have tactical means of defending it. So a takes b2 was by far the best move. Instead, though, Karpov chooses bishop takes b4, and this really gives White an opportunity to play, first of all, h6, really eyeing these dark squares around the king. Black doesn't panic, he just responds with rook e8. And now b3 was the key move that White missed here. Keeping things closed on the queen's side would have been far more preferable than allowing Black to take on b2. Of course, this does give Black some time to remaneuver his pieces, but it's well worth it to keep Black locked out of the queen's side. Instead, though, we see h takes g7. This knight comes to d7. And now after rook b3, we see bishop e7, keeping this bishop on the board. This rook comes to c3. This queen comes to b7. And now after first rook c7, then queen b5, only now White plays b3. But the problem here for White is that he had two problems to solve. And let's go back to h takes g7. This move forces Black to play knight d7, but the problem is knight d7 is actually making a threat. knight takes e5 is a very, very significant move that white has to look out for. You very much don't want to allow this trade. At the same time, though, you very much don't want to allow pawn takes b2. And so there are two problems to solve here. And really, white only had one chance to solve them, and that was by taking on a3. You use this tempo on the bishop in order to solve all of your problems at once. Instead, though, with what we see with rook b3, bishop e7, rook c3, queen b7, rook c7, queen b5, there's no way to solve both problems at the same time. White chose to solve the problem of a takes b2, but knight takes c5, d takes c5 is actually so powerful for black that he's simply winning the game now. The bishop was needed to attack this king. Now there's simply queen b4 being played, king g2, trying to use this h-file, rook a c8, rook a7, queen d4. This very, very nice central square for the queen is available due to the absence of this dark squared bishop. Rook a4, and now the pawns start falling off the board for white. We see a few more moves, g5, this queen comes up to b2, and really this queen is just collecting all of the pawns. And this king comes back to h1. We see king g7, using the h-file now to black's advantage. Rook a7, bishop c5. Rook takes f7 was white's choice, and now white simply resigns the game. Of course, if white had just moved the rook out of the way, bishop takes f2 would be devastating, with rook h8 quickly to follow. And I feel like this was a very, very instructive game for Karpov here. You see both players ignoring each other, playing on the side of the board, but on opposite sides of the board, but when it really counts, white missed his opportunity to lock things down on the queen's side. So always be on the lookout in your games for ways to really slow down your opponent's plan at the right moment. That being said, Karpov broke through, won the game, and kudos to him for being the first, maybe unofficial World Rapid Champion all the way back in 1988. With that being said, this was Game Review. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you in the next episode.